In the hush of a white tablecloth morning in San Francisco's financial district, a billionaire laughed too loudly. His laughter was aimed at a young waitress, a quiet, tired woman who gently corrected his mangled Greek. But the room changed when she responded, not with protest, not with shame, but with a voice like stone and sky, reciting ancient philosophy in the original tongue. Her tray still in hand, her apron still tied, she cracked the silence open like a myth. No one at the table remembered their eggs. Everyone remembered her. The floor had just been mopped, and the scent of lemon cleaner lingered in the corners, cut now by espresso and freshly baked sourdough. Leia moved like she always did, quickly, carefully, nearly soundless. The clatter of plates and the dull thump of shoes on polished wood wrapped her like fog, made her disappear into the noise. At 29, she had become good at this. Invisibility. Her ponytail was tight, her shirt pressed, and her name tag read Leia H. She rarely got called by it. Most called her Han or Miss, or didn't bother at all. She floated between tables, refilled sparkling water before anyone asked, retrieved oat milk without a word. Her eyes caught every gesture, a lifted pinky, a glance at a watch, and she translated each into service. A folded napkin. New one now. Empty cup. Clear it, quick. When the regular in table 6 smirked and said, "Thanks, sweetheart," she nodded. Not a smile, not quite. Just that bare trace of politeness she'd trained into a shield. By noon, her white sneakers had soaked up coffee drips and a little champagne. She moved them in rhythm, heel, toe, twist, pivot. She didn't trip. That was something. The floor manager whispered orders in his headset like a stage director. VIPs arriving in 20. Everything polished. Leia didn't respond. She just folded a napkin with exact precision, the linen sharp as paper. Lunch shift brought a sea of expensive suits and quiet murmurs about markets and acquisitions. Leia slipped through them with practiced silence. At the kitchen window, a bowl of mezzodakia waited. Feta, olives, dolmas curled like little scrolls. She read the handwritten order twice. The chef had misspelled it again. "Just so you know," she murmured, her voice steady. "It's pronounced mezzodakia." The head chef, a stocky man with too much sweat on his brow, raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? What are you? A food critic now?" She said nothing. He chuckled, half mean. "Guess we got a linguist in the house." Her silence was a shrug, but the words stayed in the air like a misfired joke. After the lunch rush, she sat on the back of the bus home. Her knees ached, and the left shoe rubbed raw against her heel. The seat beside her was empty. Always was. She pulled a worn paperback from her bag. The Ethics of Aristotle. Inside the cover, faint pencil scribble. Leia Houle, 2017. It looked like someone else's handwriting now, someone she'd almost forgotten. Outside, the bus rolled past the gates of UC Berkeley. She didn't look. Her apartment was small, just a studio above a nail salon, and it smelled faintly of acetone and boiled rice. She changed into loose clothes and warmed lentil stew from a glass jar. No music. Just the occasional upstairs creak, the hum of the fridge. She reread the passage she'd marked years ago. The part about arete, virtue as practice, not inheritance. She mouthed it in Greek, the syllables forming like old muscle memory. For a moment, she wasn't tired. The next morning was different. Someone from Wayfinder Tech was coming. The Wayfinder Tech. Half the staff was whispering about it. A private table had been booked under the name Carlyle. They cleaned the table twice, polished the forks 3 times. Leia volunteered for the table before they asked. "You sure?" Her shift lead blinked. "Yeah," she said. "I'm good." She was good at this. But when the name hit her tongue, Wayfinder, her father's voice echoed low and bitter. They took everything, said it was just restructuring. She hadn't told anyone, not about the bankruptcy, not about the way their small translation business folded overnight when Wayfinder Capital pulled their contract. Her father's hands had trembled for days after. He never blamed her. But she remembered the way he stopped, smiling. The VIP party arrived 5 minutes late. Leia spotted him instantly. Brian Carlyle. 60-something silver hair with just enough artful mess. Navy blazer that probably cost her month's rent. He laughed too loud, gestured too wide. A table of orbiting suits followed him in like moons. "Let's order something Mediterranean." "What's that thing?" "Mez something." His eyes scanned the menu. Mez Kia. "Mesodakia," Leia said, standing beside him. Calm. He looked up. "What?" she repeated gently. "Mesodakia." His eyes twinkled, the kind of glint that didn't mean joy. "Well, aren't you fancy?" He grinned at the table. "She thinks she's Greek now." Polite chuckles. Someone sipped too fast and coughed. Carlyle leaned back, eyes on her. "All right, Professor. Why don't you translate something for us, huh? Since you're clearly overqualified for pouring water." The room held its breath. A busboy paused mid-step. Even the kitchen quieted for a second. Leia's fingers tightened on the pitcher. Then she spoke. Her voice didn't rise, didn't shake. It wasn't a performance. It was invocation. "Tan tropin agatha u kentoplithi, alentipiotiti inedoki." Her vowels rolled like marble, each syllable round and deliberate. Carlyle blinked. She continued. "Ugar topolakis legin semnon, alatoyu legin." A quiet fell. The waiter behind her stopped moving. One of the women at the table, maybe legal counsel, maybe PR, exhaled like she'd forgotten how. Carlyle's smile faltered, crooked at the edges. What the hell was that? She met his gaze, level. Aristotle, Nicomachean ethics. It is not the quantity, but the quality of a thing that makes it good. Silence. A man in a beige suit at the corner of the table cleared his throat. "Well said." Carlyle said nothing. After a beat, the professor in beige stood up. "Forgive me," he said with a Greek accent, "but your pronunciation was excellent. May I ask where you studied?" Leia hesitated. "Berkeley, classical philology." The man smiled. "Athens, myself. A pleasure to meet someone with such memory." She nodded. The rest of the lunch unfolded like a dream pressed under glass. The other servers watched her differently, some with awe, others with caution. The manager kept checking his phone. Carlyle finished his lunch, didn't speak to her again. At the end of her shift, while untying her apron in the back hallway, one of the younger servers leaned close. "That was badass," she whispered. "You see their faces." Leia didn't answer. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something else. Something like release. Then the manager called her in. His tie was loose. He rubbed his eyes, hard. Leia, we need to talk. She stood in the doorway. That outburst, he said. It put us in a tricky position. He's an important client. She said nothing. I mean, Jesus, Leia. You corrected him at the table. In Greek. Still, she was quiet. He shifted. Look, I'm not saying you were wrong, but we're a business. And you were not hired to make a scene. She met his eyes. I didn't. He opened his mouth, closed it again. You can go, he said finally. She walked out. The sidewalk outside was cold against the soles of her shoes. She stopped at the corner, the hum of traffic around her, and let the sunlight hit her face. Across the street, the Wayfinder limo idled, exhaust ghosting upward. Inside her apron pocket, she still had the order slip with the word Mesodakia. She crumpled it slowly, then let it fall. The wind didn't pick it up. Not yet. The video was 27 seconds long, grainy, shot from an iPhone, slightly tilted. It showed a man in a navy blazer laughing too hard, and a woman standing beside him, poised and still, as if she were waiting for the wind to settle. Then came the Greek, the shift in the air, the sudden stillness, and when she finished, you could almost hear the breath being held. Someone had written in the caption, "When the waitress turns out to be Socrates." Within hours, it was everywhere. By the time Leia got off her evening bus the next day, she knew something was wrong. Or right. Or neither. Her phone, usually quiet, buzzed every 3 minutes. Messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Mentions on Instagram. A few emails with subject lines like quick chat and media inquiry. She stood still on the curb outside her building for a long time, staring at the screen like it might suddenly translate itself into something simple. Upstairs, the door to her apartment stuck like it always did. She kicked it gently with her foot, stepped inside, locked it behind her. The air was still warm from the sun that hit the west-facing window. Her stew from yesterday sat untouched in the fridge. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. This one from a familiar name. Dr. Leland Morris. She hadn't heard from him in 3 years. You still read Aristotle better than most of us. That took guts. Proud of you. She sat down on the floor, just slid down the cabinet and let herself rest there. Her hands covered her face, but she wasn't crying. Just breathing. By morning, the cafe across the street had printed out a blurry photo of her and taped it to the register. Coffee on us if you can recite a line of ancient Greek. Someone had started a hashtag, aren't so smart like Leah. Misspelled her name, but it didn't matter. It spread anyway. At the restaurant, the shift lead pulled her aside before she even clocked in. You're, famous now. She didn't answer. You trending? He pulled at the collar of his polo shirt. Management's worried. Carlyle's a major investor in half this block. He laughed at me, she said quietly. I just spoke. Yeah, well, welcome to America. He tried to grin. Can you keep it quiet today? No, Aristotle. She nodded. That day, she worked faster than usual. Not better, just faster. She kept her head down. Some guests recognized her and tried to sneak photos. Others looked away, as if afraid she might speak again. And then came the interview. Brian Carlyle, now under pressure, mocked and dissected, appeared on morning television, seated in a beige armchair in front of a bookshelf of fake classics. They're making a hero out of a waitress, he said, lips tight. This is what happens when the internet plays dress up with reality. A moment of theater. And suddenly, I'm the villain. The interviewer had smiled politely, said nothing. Leia watched the clip that evening on her laptop, sitting cross-legged on her bed. Her inbox was flooded now. Offers to speak, to write, to consult, to be a voice. She didn't want to be a voice. She just wanted to sleep. And maybe read a bit more of the metaphysics, the parts she'd skipped. That night she walked out to get air, ended up taking the bus again, though she didn't know where she was going. The city at night hummed differently, slower, softer, but no less alive. She found herself outside the care home in the Sunset District, the one her father had moved to after the bankruptcy, after his health began to slip. He didn't recognize her right away. "Lee," he said, blinking, "you cut your hair." She hadn't. They talked for a while, mostly about the food, bland, too soft, and the nurse who kept calling him sir, like he was still in court. Then, finally, "I saw you," he said. She looked up. "In the video, you sounded like your mother." His eyes twitched a little. She would have liked that. Leia reached for his hand. His skin was thinner than she remembered. "They think I should speak at something," she murmured. He chuckled. "Well, you've always had a gift. I thought I lost it." He turned toward her then, real clear. "You didn't lose it," he said. "You just stopped using it." When she got home, another email waited. This one from Geneva, the United Nations. They were seeking linguists for a conflict resolution mission, someone fluent in ancient and modern Greek, with an understanding of cultural nuance. The message was respectful, formal. It came with a file attached, and a deadline. She closed the laptop, turned out the light. The next day, Carlyle came back, not officially, not as a guest. He walked in unannounced, sunglasses on, flanked by an assistant. He requested a coffee, black, and sat at the bar. Said nothing for 15 minutes, then called for her. Leia stood across from him, arms at her sides. He gestured at a contract folder beside him. "You've got fans now. Big ones." She didn't reply. Carlyle leaned in slightly. "There's a clause in here about employee conduct. You know that, right?" She looked at the folder, didn't touch it. "There were errors," he continued, "in a recent filing. You pointed one out, in Greek no less, which ironically may cost us millions in arbitration." Leia tilted her head. "Then maybe you should have listened." He exhaled. "You're smart. We get it. Congratulations. But don't think this makes you untouchable." "I never was," she said. "You were." Their eyes held for a moment too long. Then he stood, gathered the folder, and left. No goodbye. That night, Leia went to bed early, but didn't sleep. At 3:14 a.m., she sent a reply to the UN. 3 days later, the first protest signs showed up outside Wayfinder headquarters. Not big crowds, just a handful of students, professors, quiet workers with handwritten boards. "Knowledge is not a threat." "We see you, Leah." The company released a statement. Carlyle was on sabbatical, internal restructuring, legal department reviewing language compliance in filings. No mention of her name. The restaurant buzzed with gossip. Some staff treated her like a mascot now. Others avoided her entirely. The chef, surprisingly, said nothing. Just handed her a plate one afternoon and muttered, "Thanks for the correction." She blinked. "What?" "Bouillabaisse." I've been saying it wrong for years. Should have known you'd catch it. She smiled. Just barely. The next morning, an email came through with a flight itinerary and a welcome letter. Geneva. 2 weeks. She packed one suitcase, left behind most of her books, took only one. The ethics. As she zipped the bag, her phone buzzed once more. A message from her father. Just one line. You did more than I ever dreamed. Thank you. Leia stood in the doorway of her apartment, took one last look. Then quietly, she turned off the light. They didn't recognize her at the airport. No one looked twice. That was the strangest part. After weeks of viral clips and hashtags, headlines, and panel invitations, she walked through the international terminal like she'd always wanted, unnoticed. The badge in her pocket said, Linguistic Advisor, UN Mission, MER 4137. Her boarding pass said, Geneva. But inside, something older stirred. The girl who used to whisper conjugations under her breath on the way to class. She was still there, only taller now, quieter, stronger. The plane touched down through silver clouds and early light. Geneva's mountains rose in clean, indifferent lines. The air smelled sharper than San Francisco's, more mineral than salt. A man in a dark wool coat met her at the gate with a placard. Ms. Hoole. No cameras, no questions. Just a quiet ride to a narrow hotel with wide windows. Her room had a view of the lake. She stood at the glass for a long time, watching the water fold and unfold like a thought trying to decide itself. They briefed her the next morning. Quiet, fast-spoken diplomats in a room that smelled of paper and filtered coffee. 2 factions, 3 dialects. Mistranslations had already stalled the process. She would sit in on conversations, offer clarity when needed, suggest phrasing. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. The first session lasted 6 hours. Leia said maybe 20 words, but each was deliberate. Precision was its own language. She noticed one man, older, firm-voiced, impatient, stop mid-sentence after she adjusted his phrasing. A single word had shifted the tone from accusation to inquiry. He glanced at her once, a flick of something like respect. That was enough. By the end of the week, the teams were nodding more often. The air had softened. Not solved, but softened. Sometimes all it took was one word to change a sentence. Sometimes a sentence to change the air. One night after a long session, she walked the old city alone, cobblestones under her shoes. A violinist played on a corner, something sad and slow. She paused, dropped a coin in his case, and stayed for a while. The music made her think of her mother, not because of the melody, but the patience in it. A slow, careful unfolding. She remembered the way her mother used to correct her gently, with no judgment. Try again, baby. You're almost there. Back at the hotel, an email waited. Subject line, Atlantic interview. Final draft. She hesitated before opening it. The headline read, You don't have to be important to do important things. Her photo was just her in profile, speaking softly to a group in a hallway. No makeup, no posing, just listening. She read the transcript twice. They hadn't twisted her words. They hadn't polished her. But the comments section, some called her a symbol. Others called her a fluke. A few said she was lucky or too angry or overrated. She closed the browser, sat on the edge of the bed, then laughed just once, quiet and real. A week later, a foundation in New York announced the Smart Like Leah initiative, scholarships for young women in the humanities, fully funded. Another foundation matched it. High schools started asking for curriculum kits on rhetoric and dignity in communication. She received a thank you letter from a teacher in Milwaukee. "You made Latin interesting again." She replied in Latin just to make the man smile. Back in San Francisco, Wayfinder quietly changed its board. Carlisle disappeared from their website. No formal announcement, just gone. When Leah returned to California months later, the city felt different. Not because it had changed, but because she had. The restaurant still stood on the corner of Montgomery and Clay. She walked past it one afternoon. In the front window, a small display had been set up for a temporary exhibition. Voices of Change, Bay Area Stories. Among the artifacts, a white apron, a water pitcher, a copy of The Ethics, spine cracked. She stared at it for a long time. "Leah." She turned. The chef stood at the corner, arms folded, squinting at her. "Thought you moved to Europe." "I did. Just back for a few days." He nodded, awkward. We kept your locker key. Didn't throw it out." She smiled. "You can." He chuckled. "You ever want to teach a class on pronunciation, let me know." "I'll think about it." That weekend, she spoke at a business ethics conference held in a sleek, minimalist auditorium overlooking the bay. She stood behind a narrow podium, lights low, microphone hot. The room was full of executives, students, faculty, and a few silent waiters moving quietly along the walls. She paused, then spoke. "I used to work in a place like this," she said. "Not here. But somewhere a lot like this. I served food, cleaned spills, knew when to disappear." A quiet ripple passed through the room. "I was never angry about being unseen. Not exactly. But there's a strange thing that happens when people assume you know less because you serve." She looked down briefly. The lights felt warmer now. "But I did know things. Still do. Language, history, roots, words that built cities before this one had a name." At the end, she didn't thank them for listening. She just stepped away from the mic. A young woman approached her after, barely 20, maybe still in school, eyes wide. She stammered slightly. I wanted to say, you changed how I think about everything." Leah didn't answer right away. She reached out, touched the woman's elbow gently. "You already had the change in you," she said. "I just spoke something you already knew." That night, walking back to her hotel, the city hummed again. Not louder, not different, just clearer. She passed a bookstore still open late. In the window, a handwritten sign read, "Words build bridges." She stood there, watching the reflection of her face in the glass. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. Not important exactly, just seen. And that was enough.